Great. So now we're going to do the panel. We're going to have 4 questions, and it's going to be 3 minutes for each one of you to answer the question. The first one of the great challenges of humanity is the pandemic of obesity and diabetes in the world, considerably reducing longevity. What would an optimal diet for longevity be like? What consequences are there on the body and the mind when we have a poor diet, when we consume alcohol or tobacco or have a sedentary life? To what extent does caloric restriction apply to prolong life expectancy? Dan, why don't we start with you, since we were just chatting about diet and nutrition.
So if you're eating a whole food, plant-based diet, you'll eliminate 80% of obesity. It's very hard to get overweight when you're eating high-fiber food, like beans and grains and nuts, etc. If you eat a whole food, if you eat meat less than once a week, your chances of type 2 diabetes are cut by a factor of 3. Your chances of cardiovascular disease cut by a factor of 3. Your chances of dementia cut in half, several cancers. So it's a blunt instrument. It's not nearly as sexy as the things that David talks about, but it's accessible to rich and poor. But I'll tell you, there's one thing knowing what to do, and there's another thing about how to do it. I mean, you look at Mexico here, where about 37% of people are obese, and you walk outside, and it's very hard to escape burgers and KFC and candy and chips and sodas. And we're genetically hardwired to crave those foods. And when they're constantly surround us, it's very hard to use discipline to override our genetic programming and not eat those foods. One of the best tricks, I believe, for mothers, for people who run families, is to get a pressure cooker or an Instapot, get a good cookbook or a few of them, a plant-based cookbook, and go through and identify 8 to 10 recipes that appeal to you and your family and cook them. Forget going on a diet, forget ordering, well, you can order David's supplements, but as a rule, I think most of the supplements that are marketed to us aren't all that, haven't shown much effect. And take a month and cook the food until you find a half a dozen meals that your family likes, and my job is over. And by the way, your caloric count will drop. One last example, an Okinawan stir fry looks like a compost pile. It's a pile of food, probably 5 times the volume of a hamburger, more nutrients and less calories. So
thank you for that. I love all the tips, and the pressure cooker is so key. We talk a lot about the benefits, but let's also talk about what some of those consequences are when people aren't following some of the tips that you've just given, when they're not following this diet. What are the consequences on the body and the mind when we do have a poor diet, so that people can sort of have that right in front of their face, side by side? This is what it looks like when we do what everyone's here is saying, and what it looks like when we don't.
Well, I can talk on macro. In the United States, the amount of processed food has about quadrupled. Went up 4 times since 1980. Our meat consumption's gone up about 25%. And at the same time, the obesity rate has jumped from 15% to 43%. So it's very clear eating this processed food is making us fat. Obesity is very highly associated with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and even dementia, by the way. We think that, my mom had Alzheimer's, I'm going to get it. But actually, we're now finding that about 70% of all dementia is avoidable, and it's avoidable largely, but not entirely, from how we eat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Nalini. And by the way, it's been such a pleasure to meet you and chat with you in the back.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on some of these?
Well, my focus is oncology, is cancer. And so when we think about obesity and diabetes, call that a syndrome, diabesity, that is a risk factor for cancer. because we have to think of the whole biosystem. Oncologists are fascinated by cancer cells, but not the environment that hosts those cells. And so when we have diabetes and obesity, we have the growth signals for cancer. And so the dietary factors are kind of the same thing that cause health in all types of risk of aging. So we want to control inflammation. You want to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. You do that by eating lots of plants, lots of color, lots of healthy fats and oils. You want to have a lot of fiber in your diet because that helps control your blood sugar. It also helps control estrogen signaling, which drives a lot of cancers. Estrogen and insulin, which is high in diabetes, send growth signals. They're proliferative hormones. So we have to dial that down. We also need to be eating enough protein along with healthy fats and lowering our carbohydrates. So unlike the blue zones, where the diets are primarily carbohydrate dominant, in a cancer patient and in a diabetic, the physiology's gone haywire. And so we need to have a therapeutic diet for a while to change the signaling. And so then you can lower your body fat and increase your muscle mass. And the fat itself is sending growth signals, inflammatory signals to cancer cells. And if you exercise, the muscles secrete myokines, which send inhibitory signals to tumor cells. And so it's a lifestyle prescription, basically. Sleep changes your ability to manage your blood sugar, so you have to have a normal sleep cycle. And we know that stress hormones increase blood sugar, so you have to be able to relax and manage your stress. And then the toxins that you mentioned, we know that tobacco and alcohol and red meat are carcinogens, so I limit those in cancer patients. And so that's a diet that anybody can do. You might need a little guidance and hand-holding to actually implement it, but if you imagine that you might take 6 months or a year to really transform your lifestyle and diet, it's doable. You can do it.
Absolutely. And then what are your thoughts on caloric restriction, especially
Yes.
based on your practice?
Absolutely. There's a lot of studies which are very strong in showing that intermittent fasting has a big impact on cancer. There was actually a big study with thousands of breast cancer patients that was done in Europe, showed that only restricting calories for 13 hours out of every 24 hours had a big impact not only on recurrence of breast cancer, 21% reduction in the recurrence of breast cancer in these patients, but a 30% reduction in all-cause mortality, meaning all other causes of death, were reduced just by not eating calories for 13 hours out of every 24. It's not hard to do. You eat dinner a little earlier and have breakfast a little later. It's something that could be a lifestyle change.
Absolutely. And actually, it's sort of a perfect transition to David, who's talked a lot about caloric restriction. Would you like to answer, some of the questions?
Sure, thanks. Well, I won't repeat what's been said, but I agree with all that's been said. So to add to that, I find it really rewarding that research at the top-down level, which is what Dan and his colleagues have done, has met us that are coming from the bottom up, from the molecules and the yeast and the worms and the mice. And what we've come to the conclusion is that these diets, these practices, are turning on the body's defenses. And so if we're obese, if we're eating a lot of energy, which is in the form of sugar or a lot of meat all the time, and if we're snacking all the time, our bodies get a signal that times are great. Now is not the time to hunker down and survive. And so what I do in my life is I try to not overeat. But I recognize it's extremely difficult. It's actually the hardest thing I struggle with, besides exercise, is not eating when I see food. And I agree with you, Dan, that at the hotel here, Serena and I were looking at the menu, and we could barely find anything that was not with meat. So it's really a hard thing to do. We're not saying it's easy. That's why you should start slowly. Now, I was the guy that came up with the discovery that resveratrol activates these pathways, these longevity pathways, which led to a worldwide phenomenon in red wine. Sales of red wine went up 30% after our paper in 2003. That said, I now am apologizing for promoting red wine too much. I agree with Dan that a little bit of red wine is probably not harmful, but having red wine every day, which is what I was doing for 15 years, is not the best thing. And I've now cut out nearly all alcohol from my life. And I was inspired by Serena here, actually. I'm very fortunate to have her as a role model. So I cut out alcohol. Let me pause here and say, when I met Serena, she saw what I was eating. It was what I was calling the Mediterranean diet. 2 or 3 glasses of red wine a night and cheese. That was my Mediterranean diet. Right? You see how the mind makes stuff up? The mind says, this is great, this is good for me. No. So I looked at what Serena was eating, which was what we've talked about. A lot of legumes and fresh vegetables and cooked at home things. And she said, you should really try what I do. So I was inspired, and I switched pretty quickly over to almost a fully vegan. I call myself a struggling vegan because I do eat and drink occasionally, but primarily vegan and no alcohol. And I measure my blood work because I'm a scientist, and I've tracked myself for over a decade. And within 2 months, what I thought was never going to get better got even better. I dropped another few years in my estimated biological age, and I said to Serena, I'm sticking with this lifestyle, and I have done so for now the last 2 years.
2.5.
2.5. So I really recommend it. It's not easy, though. I give you that. And then finally, I just want to add that it's not just what you eat, it's when you eat. And I agree that what you want to do is try to have a window. I try not to eat until lunch or late lunch, or even better, go till dinner. It's hard. But what you can do to help yourself is to eat small amounts. If you're hungry, you can eat a little bit of nuts or some dark chocolate. That's what I do. But mainly, I fill up, as Serena does, with liquids. So we start the day with lemon water, hot lemon water, and then some green tea matcha. Matcha, Serena also put me on, one of the best cancer-preventing drinks of all time, the thick green tea. And then I just keep drinking a lot during the day. You can see I'm drinking a lot here. I have teas. I'm almost never without something to drink, and that makes me satisfied. I think as mammals, we like to have things in our mouths. We like to smoke and eat and chew, but you can satisfy that craving with hot drinks. So that's what I do, and it works. But again, if you fail, don't give up. Try again. Go slowly, but stick with it because it's going to give you, as we've heard, decades more healthy life.
Thank you. Dr. Ernesto, I mean, we have a lot of agreement here. I think maybe some people say it's easy, some people say it's hard.
So,
with love.
yeah, just Ernesto. I'm a self-taught scientist. I have a few problems with the theories we're dealing with. One of them is it's probably it's confusing. We have the black swan, or maybe the black elephant in the room, which is Hong Kong. Hong Kong has it's a very dense area of it's absolutely a blue zone for sure, and they have the highest consumption of meat, pork, and all of the other things, fish, and so and the thing after 27 years of research in my lab, self-funded lab, by the way, the thing I regard as most important is not the quality of the calories, but the amount of it. It's just the amount of it. And actually, involuntary calorie restriction explains 97% of the variance of these regional, centenarians. It's just the war of 1919, the First World War, hunger. 1929, the Great Depression, a lot of scarcity. Then the Second World War, and then the rough years of the Iron Curtain, how do you call it, of Cold War. So that's a lot of involuntary calorie restriction. And from the models, by the way, calorie restriction is the unchallenged, most solid, replicable intervention we can do to radically extend the maximum lifespan of virtually every species. And this holds true for, 36 orders of magnitude from, fruit flies to whales. I don't know who can restrict the diet of a whale, but I mean, Claver's law is that's one of the problems. I think we're jumping to conclusions, assuming calorie restriction is the most proven way to get to radically extend lifespan. It's tricky with humans or any big animal, because Claver's law dictates the metabolic rate diminishes as a function of body weight. So what we can do to mice in the lab is just amazing, and you cannot replicate that with humans. Like, ¿cuántos de los presentes conocen mi trabajo de alguna manera? Levanten la mano. Oh my God, nobody. So that's a problem, you see? That's a problem. That is a problem, yeah. So, gracias igual por la honestidad. So they're being honest. So I think, so to sum it up, the other danger I see is a semantic trap, like Dr. Sinclair mentioned, is, okay, so plant-based. What about the pesticides? So we have a problem, a massive problem, concerning our food source. So it gets, the plot thickens when you consider how poisonous our food has come to be. So I think it requires a lot of joint effort and comparing notes, and maybe not jumping to conclusions. We humans tend to do that, right? We say, okay, I think I got it. Maybe we should slow down a bit and reconsider. Like, I have a lot of experience with the Inuit people. I lived with them. I have a documentary. It's called Cancer and Civilization. This is 12 years ago, and they had no degenerative diseases whatsoever. No cancer, no cardiovascular disease. Their lifespans were short, though, on account of the caloric expenses. Remember the L theory? The higher your metabolic rate, the shorter your lifespan. No es la L que ustedes creen. La ley de la L, ¿se acuerdan de esto? So Elvis Presley, high metabolic rate, short but happy life. And we can do that, and we can do that in the lab. We've done it many times. You can lower the metabolic rate, you can extend the lifespan of the entity. So can we do that?
Right.
And maybe we can sprinkle a few molecules like niacin or NMN there in the mix. That's what I think.
Thank you, Dr. Ernesto. So the environment plays a big role, of course, in these diets and the lifestyles. So we have another question from the festival group. We know that the passage of time in the body's cells wears them out and even mutates until they form the feared tumors. Is aging a factor in acquiring cancer and other diseases, or are we not knowing how to age healthily? So, given the contrarian beliefs, I think just on this panel, I'd like David to go, and then maybe Dr. Nalini. Do you want to jump to that first?
Thanks, Serena. So I'm not as well equipped to talk about cancer, though we do study it in my lab, in mice, though, not in humans or whales. What we've discovered is that just saying that mutations to the DNA cause cancer is missing a really important component of cancer. I'm not going to disagree with Nobel Prize-winning research that shows that mutations in certain tumor suppressors and oncogenes, as they're called, is a primary cause of cancer. That's a dogma. That's not going away. What I would like to add to the discussion, though, is that we're missing the epigenetic changes in cancer or the body that accelerate the process. I have a theory. I have lots of theories. I give them terrible names. This theory is called the gerontogenesis hypothesis. I need a marketing person. But so gerontogenesis means that as our bodies get older, through epigenetic change, which you now know all about, the body becomes more cancer-like. The body starts to look more cancer-like in its metabolism, especially using the kinds of sugars that cancer cells love typically to eat and metabolize. And so this theory is that, yes, those mutations are important, and the body's changes to the epigenome and metabolism are also making the environment that allows those mutations to thrive, and that if we address both, we'll have an even greater impact. And one of the great things about the research that we've talked about today, both lifestyle and medicines and supplements, is that it can slow that aging process of the epigenome and also slow mutations from occurring. And that's why I think these lifestyles that we've talked about help prevent and even slow and treat cancer cells or cancers when they arise.
Thank you. And Dr. Nalini.
So where I was going to go is epigenetics. So
I figured.
that's where I was going to go, because really, what do you want to know when you're a patient is, what can I do to change the signaling? Because we want to turn off growth signals and we want to turn on inhibitory stop signals. And the way that you can do that with tools from nature is because of their epigenetic signaling effects. And so resveratrol is one of those molecules. But there are many, many molecules from nature that change which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And it's kind of a misunderstanding that cancer is a problem of the DNA. It's the DNA in the nucleus is so protected, but the mitochondria that are in the cell are very vulnerable to the environmental changes and environmental toxins. And we all are living in a big environmental soup. And so when we say you need to eat a lot of plants or eat a plant-strong diet, it has to be clean food also, because you can't eat plants that are full of pesticides. So the ideas that we know cause health and sustain health are interrupted by the toxic environment that we live in. And this is really one of our challenges. And so it's a privilege to eat organic, clean food, or if you live in a village where you grow your own food and you have control over your food supply. But it's a problem, which is part of the reason we have epigenetic changes that are negative, is because the signaling from toxins in our environment is a huge problem. So we need to put some energy and attention in our sort of public health and agricultural practices in order to be able to do the things we know will work.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dr. Ernesto, is aging a factor in acquiring cancer?
Well, it is, it is a contributing factor if you factor in mitochondrial decay. It's been proven for decades now. Otto Warburg did fantastic practical work, experimental work, and you can actually induce in a otherwise normal, healthy tissue, mammalian tissue, you can induce cancer just by lowering the oxygen saturation at the tissue level. This is a mechanistically so elegant, like it's undeniable. And the bulk of my work is cancer, actually metabolic interventions to deal with cancer. For 27 years we've done that, and we've published a number of papers on the subject. We had this poor man's approach to the thing, and based on early observations 20 years ago in the positron emission tomography. It's called the PET scan, right? And so, okay, there's the formal definition in oncology of what a tumor is a concentration, is a highly hypermetabolic node in the body of sorts. So it's more complicated than that. We have certain amino acids that are critical to survival of the tumors, and they can switch paths if it needs to be. So, and it's for decades we've tried to find a primary cause of cancer in the genes. It's been like remarkably unhelpful. We have the Human Genome Project, not the Atlas Genome Project failed. But on the other hand, we have solid and cost-effective, non-toxic interventions for treating solid tumors that have proven this is a metabolic phenomenon, right? And we can deal with it metabolically. So that's my take on it. So, and of course, this observation 3 centuries ago, Gompert's law states that the probability of dying doubles every 8 years. It's actually 8.4 years. So age is a carcinogen on its own. If you consider all the and it is still like that. Like we're in the 20th century now, and the probability of dying doubles every 8.4 years. And I don't know, Fidelity and all the insurance industry still uses this law. It is a power law, and so yeah, age needs to be included. I think mechanistically, what happens there is a steady decline of respiratory capacity at the cellular level. It's the mitochondrial decay. This is an exponential decay. You can prove that through simple means in the lab, like physiologically, consumption of oxygen and some other measurements. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Thank you. So Dan, you're our lifestyle forward sort of expert here. Is aging a factor, or are we just not knowing how to live healthily?
Aging's a factor. I think it's useful to think of cancer not as a noun, but as a verb. One cell goes rogue, and most of the time a youthful immune system takes care of it, but as we get older, our immune system's capacity drops. And we're seeing in the blue zones, Okinawa, where we have good data, Sardinia, where we have good data, they suffer about a quarter to a fifth the rate of breast and prostate cancer, and in all blue zones, a much lower rate of cancers of the GI tract. And my language is population or epidemiology, so it's not just what they eat, but I want to get to that at the end here. But if you live in a stressful environment, you're creating an environment where your immune system works less efficiently and the chances of cancer catching on goes up. Toxins come from food, but they also come from automobile exhaust, which is associated with lung cancer. It comes from the existential stress of not knowing what you're going to do with your life. So once again, I like people to think of this cluster of mutually supporting lifestyle characteristics that help people avoid diseases. And just to get back to 2 points the panelists had said, carbohydrates. The worst word in the nutrition dictionary is carbohydrates, because both jelly beans and frijoles or black beans are carbohydrates, but one is the worst thing and one is the best thing. So, I'd like to challenge the industry to come up with a better word than carbohydrates when they associate it with different diseases. But also, for the epidemiology I've seen, the associations between high meat consumption and cancer, certain kinds of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and even type 2 diabetes are indisputable in my mind. In blue zones, they did eat meat. They ate about 10 kilograms of meat per year. In America, we eat about 120 kilograms of meat per year. That's a bathtub of it. As David was pointing out, when we live in our food, body environment of excess, you create this environment for diseases to take off. It is much easier to live in a slightly caloric restricted environment when you're eating beans and grains and greens than it is when you're eating calorically dense meat. And by the way, in Hong Kong, they might be eating a lot of meat today, but if you want to know what a 100-year-old ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she was eating in 1924. Sure. And in those years, there wasn't the prosperity they have today. A lot of people go to blue zones today. You go to Sardinia today, and it's like prosciutto and lamb and ham and pork chops, and it's like eating a barbecued petting zoo. But 20 years ago, they were eating fava beans and couscous and greens. So you have to see what the what they're eating over time.
I agree, yeah. Thank you. So this is sort of another two-part question. So if it's possible to stop aging, and science tells us that we live longer every day, why are there no people who are 150-year-olds now? And what social, economic, ethical, and ecological implications would there be if people did live to be more than 150 years old? So Dr. Ernesto, I'm going to start with you.
So huge problems lay ahead.
Yeah.
So we have a diminishing, actually dropping population, so birth rates. We do have, and I will much rather Dr. Sinclair take on the Hayflick limit. There's a technical, actually there's an obstacle, an intrinsic obstacle to maximum lifespan in humans. Leonard Hayflick was a brilliant biologist, and he came up with this realization: we can only replicate ourselves that amount, x amount of times, right? Mm-hmm. So it's currently believed it's at 122 years, like it's for Jean Calment, I think it was the being maximum lifespan being different from life expectancy at birth. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think there are huge biological problems there, but we're consistently getting there. Right? I hear talk about, for 30 years I forgot the term, escape velocity, longevity escape velocity. We used to call it actuarial escape velocity. So it's a very appealing concept, right? And we're consistently inching up, but the maximum lifespan of humans remains pretty much the same. Probably even has diminished a little. We have a lot of poor data from, PAMA and just Hunza in Pakistan. We have fuzzy data. If data on people's longevity, if it comes from prior to the Cultural Revolution and some other interventions from the states to, actually qualify the birth rate. So I think if we're getting there. Getting there, and the main problem I see is we're gonna outlive our rich net worth. I mean, our how do you say that? ¿Cómo se dice ahorros? Savings. We're gonna outlive our savings.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's a huge problem. We have a shrinking working population. Less and less young people will work, and an increasing aging population is going to be a problem.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for that very thorough
for
answer
that.
to the first part. No, actually, it's perfect. David, you've written published a paper. Maybe you can kind of just focus on the second part, the second question, which is what are the social, economic, ethical, and ecological implications if people did actually live to 150?
Well, so it's true. We have a declining population and an aging population. But I don't think the solution is to get everyone to be sicker and die sooner. I think it's the opposite, that we need those people who are older to remain in the workforce, or at least be productive members of society, taking care of their grandkids, and not being a burden on the village or on the healthcare system. And it's true that the longer somebody lives, the less burden they are on the economy when they die, and the quicker they die. And so we did the calculations, as Serena mentioned, and it was done with two top economists in London. And we published the calculations that if you could extend the healthy lifespan of Americans by just 1 year, that value would be $83 trillion in the ensuing decades. That's a lot of money. If we could increase healthy lifespan by a whole decade, then that would be $366 trillion. These numbers are massive. They're equivalent to the military budget. And there's no other way that I know of to save that kind of money. And the reason it's so valuable is that it's not just that you're keeping people out of nursing homes and hospitals, but the people who are alive are contributing to the economy, And if they're not home taking care of the family, they're traveling and spending money and doing good things. But you're right about the savings. And I look at the value of a country rather than an individual. And that amount of money savings just in the US would be able to pay for a lot of things, including education, helping solve climate change, and I think helping people with their savings. But I don't think people could retire at 63 or 65 if they could live to 150. That we'd have to change that. But for me, I'd rather have that extra life and work a little longer and maybe change careers if you don't like what you're doing, if you can. And that's why I talked about having a skill sabbatical, a training period in life so you can change careers, because it's going to be necessary when, not if, we all live longer. And finally, I don't see any proof that there's a limit to longevity. I see that in history it's been true, but we used to think that going at the speed of a horse was the limit to human speed, but we were just looking at horses. So I think that Hayflick's limit can be overcome. We're doing that in my lab now. And so I'm optimistic that whenever we think there's a barrier to humans, we can overcome them. But you're right, even the 40 years of average to maximum lifespan is a good playing field. It means that if we could move everybody up to the maximum, we'd have an extra 40 years, and that alone would be incredible.
My God. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Very positive.
Also have more babies.
Yeah. And thank you for those numbers, too, for us to look forward to. Dr. Nalini, would you like to add to some of that?
Well, I am not a researcher like my colleagues on the panel. I sit with individual patients who are facing their mortality and going through great loss and great suffering. So I think about the quality of life.
Yes.
And so a cancer patient needs to be concerned with that because their life may be shortened. And so what actually ends up being the most important thing, even though I expect my patients to not be under the bell curve and live longer and be healthier, it's meaning. Having meaning in their life is actually what connects them to their own will to live. And perhaps in Mexico, you don't realize that you still have the family at the center of your culture. Whereas in America, the family is broken. And so when I have a Latin family come into my office, I have to put 6 or 8 chairs in my consulting room because the whole family comes. And we know that people who have support systems and have meaning and have nurturing relationships do better in medicine when they have serious illness. I have patients who are single women who have to work because they need the money to pay for their medical bills or keep their insurance. They go through the whole thing by themselves. So in Latin America, that's less likely to happen. But in the United States,
Yes.
it's heartbreaking. And so then our clinic becomes their family and their
Yes.
support system, because that's our job too, to care for that part of the human being. So if people are going to live longer, they need to form networks of meaning and social support. So we try to
Absolutely.
help people to do that. But they need quality food to eat.
Agreed.
And the
Yes.
other thing that I think is so important, that individualized health care, individualized decision-making is the best health care. And we have sort of standard of care, kind of, assembly line health care. And so I encourage patients to advocate for themselves, to ask their physicians to make decisions based on their unique
Yes.
circumstance, because we are a biosystem in a larger ecosystem. And if those things are not considered, you have to understand the tumor, you have to understand the biosystem that hosts it, and then you have to understand the social milieu and the economic milieu and the toxic environment. All those layers go into creating health. And so no matter what your diagnosis is, all of those factors cause and sustain health,
Thank
which
you,
is really
Dr.
what we need.
Yes, thank you. And Dan, I'm so sorry our time is up, and I know you could have contributed.
I had
to that.
something
Well,
brilliant to say, but I'm not going to say it now.
You'll have to tune into his YouTube or his Instagram and find out.
See
But
me in
thank you
and
all so
Netflix.
much. Those were excellent, excellent answers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a lot of personalities here. Thank you very much. Está este libro, 32 maneras cómo ganarle al cáncer. That's yours, I think.
Yes.
Y pues está de venta también. Nos vemos a las 4:30 y simplemente quiero mandar un saludo desde aquí. I would like to greet from here to our public that's taking a look at the festival from the United States, New Zealand, Spain, Hungary, Germany,
Amazing.
Canadá, Argentina, Colombia, Indonesia, France, Chile, Perú, and the United Kingdom. Nos vemos 4:30. Muchas gracias.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Gracias.
you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thank
David,
you.
it's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.